give a warm welcome to the hosts of the Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins, and welcome back to Bride of Alternate Ending. I am, as always, your ghost, Brennan Klein, and with me, as always, is also your ghost, Tim Brayton. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing so good, Brennan. How are you doing?
Good. That one, I feel like the wheels stayed on. Like, if I just speed through so I don't have a choice to think about it, it really worked for me to introduce the show.
I do feel like it was smooth. I miss when you do... when you perform it. Like I like when you try to make a little show.
Okay, I mean, it's not.
Okay.
I was kind of doing like a monster truck thing. There was the vibe I was trying to go for. But I don't think I don't think I have the gravity to sell
you're
that.
you're not enough of a flyover country boy. I think you need to really like get into the kind of go down into the chest cavity to pull out that like resonance.
Yeah. No.
I am not going to do my monster truck rally voice at 10:30 in the morning on a Saturday, which is when, spoiler alert, that's when we're recording, but maybe one day you'll get me to do that on the air.
Yeah, no worries. I'll work on it. You're telling me that me, born and raised in Southern California, who has never even seen a monster truck, can't pull this off?
I mean, I've never seen a monster truck, but I surely have seen the ads.
No, I haven't even seen the ads. I don't know how they got to me as a cultural piece of cultural iconography, but they're in there somewhere. Anyway, speaking of kind of like down home backcountry vibes, we are here today.
I was gonna say, you know who's seen some monster trucks are stoners from the 70s.
Oh my goodness, hell yeah! So we are here. Well, we are kicking off Platinum Dunes Month, which is something we floated in our Dance of the Dead episode, and we just went for it because we hate ourselves. But the Patreons decided to be nice to us this month. They picked the movie on the list that was objectively the best, maybe objectively the most interesting, because I think Purge Anarchy is the best in my mind.
I would probably have to agree with it, but certainly we had 5 choices. 2 of them were good to okay, 3 of them were bad to nightmarish, and for a change, our beloved voters did not make us watch something terrible.
Yes, so thank you everyone for that. We are today discussing the 2003 remake, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's technically a different title because chainsaw is one word.
I have always been a little unclear whether Chainsaw with 2 words was the original copyright title or not, but yes, it does. We'll go with that. It helps to disambiguate them.
Yes, as if we needed the help. But yes, so this version of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I would say unusually for a remake does feature quite a bit of participation from kind of random people who were involved in the original. Like, we do get cinematographer Daniel Pearl back, which I think is the strongest move that this movie makes. But we also have, it's John Larroquette reading the intro again, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Much less committed, or at least much less stoned John Larroquette, I would say.
It's a weird shift. It's a very different vibe, and it almost exaggerates how much of a different vibe it is by having it still be John Larroquette.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and obviously, he was directed differently by we have Marcus Nispel on hand. He has not done anything in the past 10 years, but he did this. He did the Friday the 13th remake. That's also kind of good.
I know, like, Marcus Nispel has a very weird specific talent, which is being the only person who can direct good horror remakes.
Yeah, and certainly on the Platinum Dunes model.
Right. Which we have not as yet said what Platinum Dunes is, our topic for the month. And I feel like that might be actually just a quick place for those of you who do not happily have any sort of resonance with that title.
Oh, what a life.
You go through this world very differently than Brennan and I do. But Platinum Dunes, basically, it's a company that was founded by Michael Bay, Brad Fuller, and Andrew Form. And I couldn't tell you who Andrew Form is other than a co-founder of Platinum Dunes. But of course, Brad Fuller, fairly significant producer. Michael Bay is Michael Bay.
Yeah.
If you don't know who Michael Bay is, Lord help you, and preserve you, because frankly you're again living a better life than me. But they basically founded a company in the early 2000s whose mission statement was, let's remake old horror movies. Because the kids don't want the kind of gritty, squalid authenticity of horror movies from the 70s and 80s. They want sleek, shiny car commercial versions of horror movies starring hot starlets like Jessica Biel.
Yeah, starring tank tops more than anything.
Starring tank tops. That's exactly. It is very much the, like, what if every single horror movie was I Know What You Did Last Summer, is kind of the mood of early Platinum Dunes.
Oh, yeah.
They have branched out. They began doing original horror fairly early in their lifespan. I believe The Unborn, which was their 5th release in 2009. I think that was original. They are responsible for the Purge films. They are responsible for the Quiet Place films. And then they even briefly moved out of horror altogether with the two, I say live action in quotes, but the two live action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies from the mid-2010s.
And I would put out of horror in quotes, too.
Well, they're scary movies. They're not horror movies. And I also think that Project Almanac wasn't horror, but I've never actually seen it, so I don't know.
Yeah, that was like a time travel-y thing, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was more, it was a cerebral sci-fi, But yeah, no, Platinum Dunes, they mostly pumped out these shiny horror remakes. They did this, they did the Amityville Horror, Friday the 13th, that truly lowest of the low barrel scraper Nightmare on Elm Street remake, among others.
I mean, I'm so glad that we aren't talking about that Nightmare on Elm Street remake, but boy, that might be my least favorite remake of the entire remake cycle from like 2003 to 2011.
God, I don't think I disagree. Like, I do really dislike Rob Zombie's Halloween, but it has texture, and Nightmare on Elm Street is just nothing. But yeah, but the thing is, the thing that Platinum Dunes was doing, which is giving these like super glossy remakes to classic horror movies, they are also, just as a company, remaking the idea of Dark Castle, which was already doing this as of the late 90s. They were remaking, mostly William Castle movies. They did House on Haunted Hill, they did 13 Ghosts, and this was already happening at this point. So they just kind of hopped on that train.
Whatever happened to Dark Castle? Are they still around?
I think they vaguely are. I don't. Let me double check, because I know
I just pulled them up. Their most recent release was in 2022. Dark Castle co-produced Orphan First Kill.
Okay, see, that's what I was gonna say, because they made Orphan. That was one of their originals, and one of the better movies. 13 Ghosts is actually okay too, but
I haven't seen a lot of Dark Castle. It is definitely noticeable how quickly they ran out of William Castle films that they were interested in remaking, but.
Yeah,
we're also not here to talk about Dark Castle.
Yeah, no, we're not. But Platinum Dunes, basically nothing they have ever done is original in this, especially in this period. It's very derivative, which is why it's interesting that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003 does take some strides away from the source material, which of course is Tobe Hooper's 1974 masterwork, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think Tim and I don't think either of us can avoid bringing up the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, I think we brought it up probably once every 2 episodes since this podcast started. I think it was a very important part of the DNA of both of us, I would say, if that sounds correct to you.
I mean, it is an important part of the DNA of horror. So if you are someone who cares about horror in America as a genre, you care about Texas Chainsaw's Children. And if you care enough about horror to go backwards through it, in other words, you are not the kind of viewer that Platinum Dunes fancied for itself, you're gonna see it. You're gonna see it pretty early on in your horror, like, evolution. And once you've seen it, you have to grapple with the fact that it's a masterpiece because it is. Like, it just objectively is.
Yeah.
So yes, it is definitely a film that is crucial to both the genre and to my sort of appreciation of it, and it sounds like yours as well.
Yeah, no, I think I told the story on our Dance of the Dead episode, which we did exactly a month ago, essentially. But one of the earliest kind of like film fan experiences I had was when I was recovering from surgery in high school. I did a double feature of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the Muppet movie, and that is really distilled to the core of my being the type of movie that I'm going for. But yes, anyway, we are talking about the 2003 version, so let's do that, I guess. It is August 1973. We smash cut. There's a bunch of kids in a van. They're listening to a song from 1974 called Sweet Home Alabama.
I feel like every time I talk about this movie in public, I feel the need to bring that up because it bothers me so much. I was 7 years away from being born in 1974, but I still know that Sweet Home Alabama was not from 1973.
Yeah, it's such a glaring oversight, especially because they're specifically going to a Leonard Skinner concert, so you'd think they would have looked it up.
Right, and like, it's kind of a great way to have... This is the first Platinum Dunes films. I always misremember Amityville as being the first one, but this one beat it by almost 2 full years. I guess like 18 months. So the first thing we experience in the first Platinum Dunes film is a really blatant error in their attempt to like do the one thing that this film is going to try to do, which is be like, no, it's 1973. Let's feel 1973. Let's step away from 2003 and go back to when things were grittier and rougher and tougher and realer. And its absolute very first gesture in that direction is wrong. And that just feels like such a mission statement for Platinum Dunes.
Yeah, it really does. And if you are not looking at Jonathan Tucker at any point in the movie, it's very easy to forget that it's supposed to be the 70s.
Like there is absolutely, and this is a complaint that I know a lot of people have about Amityville as well, the hairstyles, the costumes, the body shapes are all like post the WB teen star people.
Yeah, because this movie, well, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre exists at this really weird time. It's this kind of crux of all the different things the horror genre was about to become in the early 2000s. Because, like you mentioned, I know what we did last summer. We just had that late 90s, ultra slick, postmodern kind of scream boom of slashers and whatnot. So that is going to kind of convert into the CW horror of like hot teen stars running around, like what we get in House of Wax, which I think was another Dark Castle movie.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, the 2005 one with Chad Michael Murray and Paris Hilton and just that kind of vibe. But also this is I believe the same year that the original Saw came out, that the rise of torture porn was kind of just on the horizon. And also it does come at the beginning of this immense wave of remakes that was about to hit. So it's kind of doing all of these different it's this kind of kaleidoscopic vision of the dismal future of horror for the next 5 years or so.
Absolutely.
And I like a fair amount of movies from that time, but it is a grim omen nonetheless.
It is, and I feel compelled to kind of tip my hat before we get going and admit, despite it being those things, despite it being not merely the film that precedes the wave, but I feel probably like it's the film that really triggers that wave of remakes, because this was a very enormous hit. Like this brought in like 10 times its budget. I do like this movie.
Yeah, me too. I don't hate it.
It's a movie that I shouldn't like, but I do. So I just wanted to get that right on the record. We will tease out why that is. We will tease out what is good, what is bad. But I think it's just worth letting everyone know, in case they didn't already, I do have a review of this film up on the site from many, 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 many years ago. Terribly written review. Don't go back and read it. But, yeah, I like this film. And I feel like, knowing what I know about me, that surprises even me.
Yeah, I think there's, and like you said, we will kind of discuss it. I think it's more of a sense of that there's not enough in it that's bad. Like, I don't think very much in it is particularly great, but it is doing enough that I don't hate, that I am just kind of along for the ride and having an okay time.
The thing about it that is not worse. The thing about it that is worse is when it becomes a perfectly well executed, not perfectly as in perfect, but like a sufficiently executed boilerplate slasher movie.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's never worse than a boilerplate slasher movie. And in 2003, that was already an achievement, I think.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we are long past. There are several Leprechaun movies that have come and gone. We're fully in the era of like Dr. Giggles and the Ice Cream Man, and like just these kind of lesser D tier slashers that were mostly direct to video. So this is a very different.
I mean, like theatrical horror at this point. What even was theatrical horror? I feel like this was a real distinct. I mean, Saw was about to happen and sort of bring back super violent R-rated horror, but I feel like we were really at a just PG-13 place for horror when this movie came out.
Yeah, 2001 and 2002. Yeah, what? I mean, we would have gotten Valentine with David Boreanaz in like '01, I think. Yeah, that feels right. Because going back to like '99, you get The Sixth Sense, you get The Blair Witch Project. There's something going on, but in the early 2000s. From what I can recall off the top of my head, we were kind of in search of a direction.
It felt like Saw gave a direction that was really desperately missing, and this does. I think this is the John the Baptist to Saw.
Okay, I can vibe with that. But anyway, let's talk about the plot a teeny tiny bit. So yes, I have mentioned we have kids in a van. We have Erin, played by Jessica Biel. She is kind of a wet blanket, so you know she's gonna live.
Yep.
She doesn't like that her friends like to smoke pot.
As it's a movie that starts with 5 teenagers in a van in 1973 driving to a Skynyrd concert, and one of them is trying to shame the other 4 for smoking marijuana. And it's just like, how are you friends with these people?
Yeah.
How are you part of this cultural moment?
No, it just does not work. And her boyfriend he has the oh-so 1970s name of Kemper, played by Eric Balfour. There is a...
Go ahead.
No, yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, of all the things that do not feel like 1973, Eric Balfour playing Kemper is the thing that feels least like 1973 to me. In part because, sort of getting back to this is such a, like, horror has just been through its Scream, I Don't Know What You Did Last Summer era. Eric Balfour, to me, will always be the guy who dies in the first episode of Buffy.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like even in 2003, that was kind of like his calling card, was guy who dies in the first episode of Buffy. Because it was like a big deal that he dies in the first episode of Buffy. It's not like he was just some random extra. But it does feel like that's kind of Eric Balfour's place in culture, is guy who would be on Buffy.
Yeah. No, and that speaks to the CW-ness of it all, too. And that time period. Yeah, no, it just doesn't... He's not serving 1973. Someone who sort of is Jonathan Tucker, who I mentioned. We just spent some time with Jonathan Tucker.
We did. What a wonderful little Jonathan Tucker marathon we're having now.
Yeah, because he was in the Dance of the Dead episode of Masters of Horror, which was directed by Tobe Hooper, so all kinds of connections.
He's been in both fake and real Tobe Hooper.
Yeah, exactly. Jonathan Tucker, I actually, since we were doing this, I was gonna suggest, what if we did a Jonathan Tucker month next month? But there's only 2 more horror movies that he was in.
I feel like we've more or less used up Jonathan Tucker.
Yeah, he was in The Ruins and Pulse, and other than those 2, and that's it. So we're a little bit tuckered out, I think. Thank you. But yeah, Tucker, he's playing Morgan, who is I think they kind of wanted him to go in a... What?
Can I pause for you just for a second? Because
Yeah.
I just learned this instant. Do you remember that film Skin that won the Academy Award for Best Short in 2019?
Wasn't it
2018?
terrible?
He's the guy. He's the neo-Nazi who gets
Oh.
tattooed.
Oh, good for him. He's around. Jonathan Tucker stays working.
He is, I assume, the only member of this cast to appear in an Oscar-winning film.
Probably. Maybe Jessica Biel snuck in somewhere.
She's like in the back corner of a room with Birdman or something.
Yeah, or like The Social Network. I could see her just like, hanging out next to Justin Timberlake doing something.
Okay, well, I did not mean to derail. You were starting to give us the plot.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan Tucker, I think he's maybe almost sort of meant to be the Franklin analog of like the person who's not part of a couple. He's kind of annoying, but he's not in a wheelchair, and he's not the incendiary annoyance that is Franklin. So he is basically nothing. But he does have like a little bit of a 70s fro and some gross 70s facial hair, and that's the most effort anyone has put into looking like it's 73.
Exactly. No, his facial hair is the single best piece of like period design in this movie.
Absolutely. And I would say Mike Vogel as the like resident super hot guy Andy is doing something. I would say it's confusing. So his super tight tank top and the body that is revealed by said super tight tank top and his hair, it's so 2003. But there's something about the like open tank top, chest hair, sweaty blondness of it all that does kind of evoke, I'd say, the character of Kurt from the original. So it is kind of like giving a little bit of a vibe of Texas Chainsaw, but it is just like filtered through this extremely CW gloss.
That's the thing. He is too sculpted.
Yes.
I guess sort of by default, he is the one who most evokes the 70s, like his second most evokes the 70s after Jonathan Tucker, because we only have 5 options, and none of the other 3 are doing it at all.
Yeah, oh, no. I mean, I'd say he's evoking Texas Chainsaw more than he is evoking the 1970s.
That is fair.
Okay.
That's real.
And then we have his... there is a hitchhiking lady that they have picked up named Pepper, played by Erica Larson, who they picked up yesterday, and she is just macking on him nonstop, and that's who we're dealing with. And did you notice how many character traits we named in this rundown? It wasn't many.
We had sweaty tank top, we had mackin', and we had obnoxious.
Yeah, and a wet blanket.
And a wet blanket.
It's a real dramatis personae we're dealing with here. But anyway, they pick up another hitchhiker who, oh God, I don't know if I have her name here.
I actually don't know how to pronounce her last name. If it's Lauren German or Lauren German.
Or Herman.
Or it could be. I don't think it is, but it could be.
Could be.
She is of Dutch extraction, so it's probably just German. She's been in things.
Oh, has she? I didn't recognize her.
She's vaguely that girl.
Okay.
From this period in time.
I did look up if Jane Levy was the appropriate age to be in Texas Chainsaw 2003, and she was not at all. So that was the vibe I was getting from her, though.
No, that is definitely the vibe.
But yeah, so they pick up this hitchhiker, and this is the first place where this movie is like, we are doing a different thing than the original Texas Chainsaw. Instead of being this kind of creepy, unpredictable weirdo, she is clearly just like shattered down to her core. She's clearly just been through something really awful, and she is...
Yeah, basically, instead of having the hitchhiker be part of the clan of psycho cannibals, the hitchhiker is an escaped victim of the psycho cannibals.
Yes, and very quickly they have picked her up. She showcasing the amount of sleaze to which this movie is willing to descend, which I think is a strength of the movie, depending on your stomach for it. She then pulls a gun out of her vagina and shoots herself in the head with it, which is a pretty dramatic opening statement for a movie to make, I would say.
It feels like I almost wish that the movie had made a bigger deal about that and became the kind of movie where ladies were just pulling guns out of their vaginas as like part of it's like a John Waters sort of situation.
Yeah, like that, like Jessica Biel. That's how she wins the day.
You know, I'm just saying there's pulling guns out of your vagina in a way that is sort of big and campy and disgusting and tasteless, and then there's doing it because Michael Bay is like giving you script notes, which is also just tasteless, but not like in a big way.
Yeah, it's just it's ambiently tasteless.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I could see, John Waters and Pedro Almodovar doing that, but in completely different ways, and in more satisfying ways. But this movie is at least it has a sense of this kind of like dripping, grotesque sleaziness that isn't quite at the level of like, oh, this is just some like edgelord bullshit. Like it is like, I think it fails to capture the intense sleaziness of the original, but it's like trying to do something with that. I think
there is something honest about it. It's not just like, it's gross. It actually does feel like it wants to make us feel kind of slimy and wrong.
Yeah.
Like it is not a cool movie.
Yes, that's a great point. It's not doing the Zack Snyder sucker punch thing. Like it is very much just trying to kind of grind your face into the thing that it's doing. It just it earns the sleaziness less than the original, but it's because it's not a perfect movie. That's just the thing.
It's not a perfect movie. It's still hampered by being released in 2003. It's hampered by Saw not having cleared the way for it. Like it's trying to do a thing it would have been more successful at doing 2 years later, frankly.
Yes, I think you're very right, and it's a shame that Platinum Dunes more or less immediately gave up on that aspect of it, because they were still making movies 2 years later.
I mean, they still made a Texas Chainsaw movie 3 years later. That is none of the things that I was just praising this one for being.
Yeah, they did. We will briefly touch on that in a moment, I think. But yes, so basically they have this dead girl in the back of their car, and they're like, what do we do? Should we report it? What do we do? So they end up stopping at this maybe not creepy, but just kind of decrepit and empty diner gas station kind of place. They end up learning that the sheriff is like 2 hours away, so they have to go drive to meet him at this old mill, and he's not there at first, so they're discussing what to do. A bunch of various kind of creepy things happen. And then there's these kind of two plot lines that play out and then kind of converge. The first is that Jessica Biel and Eric Balfour go to check out this bizarre brutalist mansion that is just shoved into the Texas countryside, where a bunch of, well, we don't know it's a bunch yet, but a bunch of various creepy Texans are living, along with, guess what, a chainsaw-wielding Leatherface. Surprise! And Leatherface eventually, starts to mow through the cast reasonably quickly. But then the people who are left at the car are dealing with the sheriff, played by R. Lee Ermey, in incontestably the best performance in the movie.
Oh, Christ, yes.
Yeah. And, I mean, I think that's the reason they made that kind of okay prequel in 2006, because they gave R. Lee Ermey so much more to do. I totally didn't realize how relatively little of this movie he's actually in retrospect. Because I remember him having at least a slightly bigger role, but every time he's there, he's bombastic and memorable.
And he's like absolutely the, I don't want to say the only thing that works, because he's not. He is the thing that like gives the movie its kind of flavor, and once it has been flavored, it tastes like that in a way.
Yeah.
Like, once we sort of introduce the idea of this is not just idiot teens falling into hell, which is basically what the original is. Like, there's virtually nothing in the original that you could qualify as a characterization. It's like the one guy's in a wheelchair is probably its most distinctive psychological, like, note.
Yeah.
And the killers themselves are basically just like this kind of wall. Like, they're just the violent thing that the heroine has to escape. Here, we really do get this kind of feeling of the personality of the killer family, and specifically of this sheriff character. And I think that is... It's one of the many, many ways where this is almost, I think, deliberately and consciously not making the same choices the original film made. And so once he comes in, and once we sort of learn, oh, this is where this is going, this is what kind of film this is going to be, the whole film kind of adopts that vibe, in a way.
Yeah. Like, I don't know what the right word here is, but yeah, Arlie Ermy feels like he feels like he's much more on the level of Leatherface as a genuinely potentially lethal antagonist in this movie more than the rest of the family is in the original movie. Like, I do think the rest of the family feels dangerous in the original, but essentially you're not necessarily worried about the cook killing Marilyn Burns.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily feel within the bounds of the thing that he does. But Arlie Ermy, you're like, at any moment, this man could snap Jonathan Tucker's neck for with no cause.
To me, one of the best scenes in this slasher movie, and this is something you don't usually get to say about slasher movies, one of the best scenes is a, like, suspenseful psychological standoff. And it's the scene where he's sort of taunting Jonathan Tucker with the gun.
Yes. Oh, I was going to say that too. That's definitely the best scene in this movie. It's so unsettling, and it's just not okay. It's transgressive in a genuine way.
Exactly. And it's working mostly based on Ermy's performance, which is just really aggressive in a kind of weirdly... It's weird because, like, there's nothing distinct initially, because the film, despite being the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it is trying to not let us know what's going on. So this weird sheriff shows up, and we're like, what's going on with him? He seems twitchy and weird, and I don't like being around him, and he keeps saying these grotesque, horrible things and acting in this really disturbing way. But for a really long time, the film's not actually telling us he is the patriarch of a murderous band.
Yes.
Like, we don't know that he's a danger. We just know that he's disgusting to be around for a really long time.
Yeah, it's such an unsettling performance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, my brain shut off for half a second. But yeah, no, he's a really good anchor. That standoff scene is so interesting, and I think without Arlie Ermy, this movie doesn't work. I think he's one of those key components that really makes it sing in that way. Yeah?
It's tough to say, because I do like parts of this movie that are not in any way, shape, or form him, but I think... Because I even like the movie before he shows up. I think he is the movie's vibe. Like,
yeah,
the movie
he
doesn't have a
crystallizes
vibe. He crystallizes it.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know. It's tough to say, because it already has that vibe before he shows up, but it also feels like once he shows up, like, he is where the vibe is coming from.
Yeah. Oh, and the thing that I forgot that I was going to say is that, so you can tell Arlie Ermy is having such a good time. Mm-hmm. And the way he plays this role is that the sheriff is also having a good time, but he doesn't betray that for a while. He's still playing this role of this type of sheriff that they don't know where he's coming from. And you can see this, like, glint in his eyes of, I'm just fucking with these kids. But he doesn't betray that for a long time. Exactly. Until the gun scene, probably, where things just get really off the rails. Mm-hmm. But yeah, certainly at least Arlie Ermy raises the stature of the cast considerably. Because is anyone else giving a good performance in this movie? I don't know that anyone's giving a genuinely bad performance, but is anyone else good?
Good is a perhaps inapt word, but I would say in terms of the villains, we don't get to see her for quite a long time, and it's a pretty small role when she shows up. I do think that Marietta Merrick, or I guess Marietta Merrick is how you pronounce her last name, who ends up being like the leader of the family, essentially, when we finally meet her. Mm-hmm. Brief role, but I think she has a lot of presence. Like, she's sort of doing lady version of what Ermie's up to, and I like it.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, a lot of the, like, kind of all and sundry family members are delivering some kind of vibe.
And I will also say, given the limitations of the role, which you can have your killer with an edged weapon be more or less complicated, and this is not a movie that makes him very complicated.
No, not at all.
But I do think Andrew Briniarski's he is bringing the large bear-like animal with a chainsaw energy in a way that helps. Like, I find this film's Leatherface very actually, like, unnerving to be around in a way that I do not always find Leatherface to be unnerving to be around.
Okay, yeah, I can hear that, because I think part of it is just his size. He's just such a tall, like, he fills the frame.
Right.
But you're right. No, he definitely, there's that kind of raw animal energy. I kind of ignore Leatherface in this movie because, you know, there are so many ways where you can't help but compare it to the original, and the original Leatherface is a much more kind of poetic character in a weird way, and I know that's kind of weird to say, but there's...
No, I get what you mean, though.
Yeah, just there's more going on with him, and the Leatherface here, he is a brick wall. Like, he's not a character, but he is just a presence. But bringing that to life is still a challenge, so you're right.
Yeah, like, because there's definitely... I mean, we're not talking Kane Hodder's Jason Voorhees here, but there is a difference between the big hulking dude who we will, like, have run towards the rest of the cast in our shots, and, like, this person needs to feel threatening. Like, he needs to have a threatening presence, and, like, you don't always get that, and he's got that. It's the only thing that the role asks him to have. Like, I do not get any sense of Leatherface as someone who has, like, an interiority.
No.
Which I weirdly do get in the first film. Like I don't know what that interiority is, but I trust that he has one.
Yeah.
In this film, it's just he's a big old fucking piece of meat.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the thing in the original is that you're not meant to understand Leatherface, but there's clearly something going on with him.
It's in the original, he feels alien. Because
Yeah.
in the original, he feels like whatever's going on in his brain is beyond any frame of reference I have. That is not what he has in this film, but I do think what he has in this film is still something that, again, at the level of boilerplate slasher film, pleases me.
Yes, very much. No, okay, so you're right. I think, like, as a whole, the kind of cadre of villains here is doing something, but the dead meat characters are largely...
The teens suck. The teens suck.
Yeah, Jessica Biel is ungreat in this role. It doesn't help that Erin kind of sucks as a final girl.
Yeah.
Every chance, like, I just wanted to scream at her, use your words. She's one of those people in a movie where when they're trying to explain to an authority figure of some kind or someone who could potentially help, like, there is a man chasing me with a chainsaw, he's gonna kill us. She just cannot express herself. She's like, he's gonna get you too. It's like, well, who the fuck are you talking about? We need a subject, an object, and a verb. It's not that hard. And I believe I mentioned in the Dance of the Dead episode that Jonathan Tucker, especially at this period of his career, he kind of has a mean case of spit mouth. Like, it just sounds like he's just constantly just salivating in his own mouth, and it's difficult for him to enunciate, and that's fine. But it's especially, I can't understand half the lines he says in this movie.
No. I will also say of Beale in particular, because she is our final girl, she was the name.
Yeah.
I mean, like, to a certain set of human beings, Ermie was a name, and in a limited way, Balfour was, like, at least, like, oh, it's that guy. But Jessica Biel's the name, for sure.
Yeah. On the Blu-ray I have, it says Jessica Biel and Eric Balfour on top, and that's it.
There you go. There you
yeah,
go.
a wild choice. But yeah, what was she? Was she on Party of Five or something? Was that what she did?
I don't have that at my fingertips. I will try to scrounge that up while I look for this. This isn't a phrase that people used in 2003. They didn't really use this phrase until like 2001 or 2021 or something like that. But she's got such a great. She was on Seventh Heaven.
That's I've never seen either of those shows, and they feel the same to me.
I concur on both counts. But no, she has a real strong case of that this woman has seen a cell phone syndrome. And maybe in 2003 we need to frame that differently. This woman has eaten lunch at a mall food court. But like, she does not feel like it's the 70s, and not that anyone does, but it's really conspicuously the case that she does not.
Got it. She has put an away message on AIM.
Yes. Yes, she has.
But yeah, no.
She has thrown away AOL discs.
Yeah. It just doesn't work, and she's not trying. Well, none of them are. Well, I guess technically the characters are from Arizona, but they're not really capturing a Texas-y vibe or like a Southern-y vibe. But certainly, they're hard. I don't think any of them is trying to be 1970s in any way.
If they're from Arizona, so where are they going to, and where are they coming from?
Well, they're going. Mexico is mentioned at some point.
They went on a trip to Mexico prior to where they are now.
Yes, and they're going to a Leonard Skinner concert, I guess, in Texas.
I just assumed that the Skinner concert was in California.
I don't think
I don't know why I assumed that. I don't think there's any indication at all of where the Skinner concert occurs.
There might be, but if Jonathan Tucker said it, no one would know. The answer's been lost to time.
I guess it's just weird because if you're leaving Arizona going through Texas, is the concert in New Orleans? Like, where are they headed? I don't know.
Florida?
Doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't. But the theory is that the concert was that night, right? So, East Texas? I don't know.
I don't know if I picked up that detail. Yeah, this is not a movie in which the Leonard Skinnerd is being applied thoughtfully. Mm-hmm. I think it's more like, what is a film that our target audience, who are people that in 2003 are like 17 to 20 years old and have probably never thought about pop culture produced before like 1985, will this connote the 70s to them? Great. And Leonard Skinner is, in 2003, I think, still just barely well-known enough that, like, you can do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm looking up when Guitar Hero was invented. Okay, 2 years after this movie. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely a Guitar Hero rock band kind of band. And that's how most people in 2007 would know them, I imagine. But yeah, so... Yeah, no, it is so illiberally 70s in so many ways, but they're not giving anything. It's so it is it disappointing? I don't know. It's just like, it's so much more boring to spend time with them than to spend time with the villains.
It is.
But one cast member who I'm glad is only in one frame of the movie is Ain't It Cool News' Harry Knowles, who plays a severed head in a little cameo, and it's like, oh, what a goddamn delight it is to see Harry Knowles in a movie.
It was a weird time in culture.
It really was. I recently what?
I had completely forgotten that happened, and then it happened, and I was like, "Fuck me."
Yeah, it's just there. He gets this loving close up, and it makes me want to throw up, Tim. I recently reread his Blade 2 review. Have you ever read that?
I don't know that I've read any of his reviews. I've encountered his opinions through other means, but like, tell me about his Blade 2 review.
Well, his Blade 2 review is just an extended metaphor about Guillermo del Toro performing cunnilingus on the audience. And it is one of the most grotesque...
In a good way?
In a good way.
Okay.
But it is a review that has some of the least content I've ever read, and one of the most just genuinely upsetting things I have encountered in my time. Although I gotta tell you, I was reading a review of the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie, Poor Things.
Well, if you describe a Yorgos Lanthimos movie as having feeling like the film is performing cunnilingus on us, you're probably just being accurate.
Yes, no, sorry. This is kind of a separate thing, just about lack of content in the review. I was reading it. Should I shout out who it was? I don't know, but it might have been on a certain news platform from New York, and they know what time it is. But anyway, I was reading the review, and I read the entire thing, and I was like, what does this person think of the movie? I don't think I actually learned that. It was like so overwritten, and to make a point about like, this is what the movie is, and this is what it means to America. And I was just like, is it good? It was such an empty thing full of thesaurus words, and it was such a dissatisfying experience for me. Anyway, what are we talking about?
We are talking about how the kids in Texas Chainsaw are pretty dull.
Yes. Oh. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. You seem to be very excited for your next point.
Oh, well, just the non-Harry Knowles cameo that I was most excited for was that we do get an Alfred E. Newman cameo. There is a poster of him on the roof of the van that does get chainsawed. So this is another, just like we have a Jonathan Tucker marathon, we have a secret Alfred E. Newman marathon between this and Carnosaur.
I mean, Carnosaur was long enough ago that it is a very erratic marathon, but I do appreciate.
Well, it's kind of like our zombies marathon in terms of spacing.
That's an extremely good point. One thing I do want to say though, as much as the kids themselves are not like interesting people, the half of the film, and it is awfully close to a half of the film, where it's just the five of them sort of not knowing what the hell is happening and finding the sheriff really, really weird and unpleasant, and being kind of stuck at this like strange, decrepit looking space and just not really knowing what's going on. So they were looking around, they're poking around, they're getting into trouble. Basically the half of the movie before Leatherface shows up it's a kind of weird, creepy, sweaty, hot, summery vibe. It feels like just everything's awful. Like they're in this wretched part of the world. They're in like the part of Texas where there isn't anything remotely interesting to look at. So it's just like flat, scrubby. The buildings all look like they were abandoned 40 years ago. The people all look like they've just been like weathered in the desert sun for those same 40 years. That part of the movie really kind of works for me. It's creepy without being scary, and it's kind of ominous without telling us why it's being ominous. It's just like, you know what sucks? Texas.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what's cool about it. It's like, yeah, no, out in rural Texas, this is just what it's like, and it's horrible, and it's awful, and you're going to die here. And it doesn't even really matter if you're going to die here because someone with a chainsaw comes and cuts you apart. It's just like, you're just going to die here because it's the worst place on earth.
Yeah, no, I get that, and it's that's the thing that I was trying to articulate earlier, which is that I don't think anything in this movie is bad. Some of it is not enough, and I think Jessica Biel gets closest to delivering something that's genuinely not good. But
I will be honest, like Jessica Biel is not good, and she's a huge part of the film, so that's a problem. I think that Erica Learson is giving the film's worst performance.
She's in a little enough of it that
that's the thing.
Yeah. I guess I agree with you. She made next to no impression on me, which is fine with me. Yeah, like spending time with these kids, it's not like it's miserable because they're not just these like hollow nothing performers. It's just they're mostly adequate. Mike Vogel is unspeakably hot, even though he is anachronistic in this movie. So that's a good time. And he does spend a lot of time writhing on a meat hook and just being extremely wet. And it's like, all right, I mean, you know, that
just learned a thing about you that I would have been fine not to learn, but okay.
It's not the meat hook, but it is the arched back wet tank top of it all. It's definitely.
I was saying, I believe you were not raised Catholic.
I was not.
But if you had been raised Catholic, I feel like Saint Sebastian would have been your favorite saint.
Ooh, I actually just yesterday got a Blu-ray copy of Derek Jarman's Sebastian that I'm planning on
It's
watching.
so good.
I'm
but
so excited.
You get like the idea of like Saint Sebastian as this kind of like long-standing. Like Derek Jarman did not invent that.
Yeah, I just it just ties in with something that is happening to me currently.
Like hot shirtless guy sort of arching his back, writhing in pain as he's being tortured to death.
Yeah,
and
no,
it's hot.
It kind of is. And there is a little bit of kind of Catholic-y imagery in that scene. It is very much a crucifixion moment for Mike Vogel.
The part of this film that is, I'm pretty sure, Jessica Biel puncturing the side of the crucified Mark Vogel, is such an unbelievably straightforward reference to the actual crucifixion, and I have no idea why it's in this movie.
Yeah, and then she says, "Please forgive me." That is the only scene where you're like, oh, does this movie have a theme? And then later you're like, oh, no, it doesn't. That's fine.
It's just, and that's what's weird about it. It's like, it's not an accident. Like, you do not stage that scene that way. You do not include those dialogue choices and not realize that you're making a reference to, like, a really narrowly focused detail from the crucifixion. Because it's not just, like, the cruciform posed. It's the, like, pierced the side to, like, finally kill him, basically. I don't know. It is so weird for that to be in this movie because there's nothing else in this film's 99 minutes that in any way, shape, or form are trafficking in that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that scene and I was like, I guess maybe it's meant to deliver a kind of like, there is no God, you are beyond deliverance, we are in hell. But then I was like, or it's not, we'll move on.
But it's also like, because it's a specific enough reference that I wonder if people even notice that it's there, because you're not being flagged to notice that it's there. It just suddenly happens.
Yeah, it's deeply peculiar.
Really, really threw us. I don't remember that movie from when I saw this last, but it really, really threw me when I watched it this time.
Yeah, I truly don't know what to make of it. But yeah, what else do we got? Oh, I want to talk to you about, speaking of symbolism or not, what do you think of the house in this movie?
I think it is a great movie set. I think it is so creepy and so, like, they find so many ways to evoke how houses rot. It is not a building in Texas.
No, it
is not a house in Texas. The most charitable conceivable way I can describe the house, it feels like a massive cotton plantation from before the Civil War, but those didn't exist in Texas, and even the ones that did exist didn't actually look like that. Like you used brutalist before, and it's not quite brutalist, but it's not neoclassical. It is not the way a building would look like that if it had been built at any point when that kind of building would have been built in the American Southland. Yeah,
no, it just, and I just don't know, like, I do think that the movie does a little bit lose its way in terms of representing Texas as well. Because, I mean, again, you can't not compare it to the original, because the original is so much about what it's like to be in summer and just baking and miserable. And this movie is sweaty and gross, but it does feel hot, but it doesn't feel summer. Because it's got that like kind of cool blue slate gray tint going on that Platinum Dunes would kind of apply to all of their remakes eventually. But yeah, I just like, the house doesn't feel right to me, but I also think that that's probably okay because it's not supposed to. But I'm just I never quite figure out what to make of it, but I like looking at it. It's very weird.
It's very weird. It feels terrifying. Like it's a threat. Again, it's a sort of R. Lee Ermey of it. The second that you see it, you're like, oh, well, this is bad. Like, this is a place that is full of danger and hostility. And you sort of can't actually frame that in terms of what about it. You just know that it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's just not right. It's just squat and ugly, and
it's like exactly rectangular. Like, it has no filigree.
Yeah, it feels like this kind of like Eastern Bloc hellscape has fallen into the Southland.
It feels like a Soviet like government building.
Yes. And I was watching this movie while my boyfriend Ben was taking a nap on the couch, but he woke up for a couple shots of the house, and he pointed out how it looks like whenever you see the house at night, it looks like the moon has fallen on the ground behind it and is sending these shafts of light.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's just, I mean, that's, thank you, Daniel Pearl, for he loves a shaft of light. If he can put one somewhere, it's gonna go. But yeah, just everything about it just looks so wrong, and it is interesting.
And like the defense of it is it looks wrong because it's meant to feel unsettling and uncanny. I don't think this film is that sophisticated. I think it's just like, this is a big fucking scary house.
Yeah, probably.
And it's like, no, this is a stupid fucking house is what this is.
Yeah, it's not a house. But anyway, yeah, so Daniel Pearl, though. Daniel Pearl. I mean, Ermey's great, but Pearl's the MVP of this movie. Yeah, and he set the blueprint for what these movies were going to look like, for better or for worse, for the next decade. But there's something so distinctive and glorious about, especially anytime we're running through the woods and you see Jessica Biel just running through these individual shafts of light with these kind of sandy dust motes floating through them. It's really pretty.
It's really pretty. And he's working into like entirely different modes, because the night mode is like all of these like shafts of light, really high contrast. Same thing when she's in the basement, and it's just like the basement is kind of constructed out of like these like slats of light.
Oh yeah, that's great too.
Crawling their way through the like horrible wooden walls, and then outside during the day, it's just this incredible color grade where it's like it's blue with like yellow elements, so it's like this really just sickly like rotting fruit color. And, like, it's always kind of overlit. Like, the exposure's a little off, so, like, everything feels kind of washed out and just tired. It's not the thing he did for the first movie, which is, I think, one of the great pieces of horror cinematography, where it's just this, like, plunge into filthy grain that just makes everything feel just corroded and ancient. But it does have that same sense of, like, what, as far as he can go, in a Michael Bay production from 2003, targeting teenagers. R rating or not, it's targeting teenagers. He's taking that as far in the direction of, like, this is just corroded. Like, everything is just covered in acid and rot. And he's bringing that as far as he can while still making a slick Michael Bay music video, basically.
Yeah, it is tremendously effective. And to the point that he would keep doing that for a long time. Like, there was a... Yep. When I was doing an Alien and Predator marathon, I saw Aliens versus Predator Requiem. I was like, did Daniel Pearl shoot this? And I looked it up, and he sure did. You can tell. That movie, I mean, the lighting sucks in that movie. I don't think they could afford more than 2 lights, but he did his best.
Yeah.
Yes.
I will be doing that marathon this calendar year.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Okay, interesting. I can't wait to read your Letterboxd reviews.
He also shot The Boy. That's like the last movie he shot that I've heard of.
Yeah, and he's kind of a workman director. He just does whatever. He directed a music video, or cinematographer. That's the word I meant.
Yeah.
But he did an Ed Sheeran music video, probably his best one. It also involves giant shafts of light.
I learned something a couple years ago about Daniel Pearl that made me feel kind of sad for him. I know a guy who met him. Basically,
okay.
Like one of the people I work with here in Madison, and apparently, like, Daniel Pearl really, really wanted, before he sort of de facto retired, he wanted to like shoot movies that weren't horror films.
Oh,
but he kind of had gotten like trapped in this, like, well, you're really good at shooting horror films, so we're gonna have you shoot horror films, and apparently that was like a professional frustration to him. So like he did the best job he could on these films, but like he never got to branch out and show the other skills. So it kind of makes me feel bad for him. But
yeah,
he did very good. He was very good at doing this thing. So I get it.
Yeah, no, I mean, no complaints from receiving the work. Yeah, it's a bummer. It's kind of what happened to Wes Craven too. And then he made Music of the Heart, and you're like, well, maybe you shouldn't have.
I was gonna say like something. Wes Craven had his shot, and he proved that he had best not take a second one.
But anyway, I know you have a hard out. We're running out of time. So is there anything really important that you think we haven't touched on yet?
I mean, my out is not breathing down our necks. What have we not touched on? I mean, we really, shockingly, I think, have done a very good job of not actually using the original film to find fault with this one. And I'm proud of us for that, because I think it's trying not to be the original film, and we haven't really dug into that too much. So I kind of wanted to ask you, like, other than the cinematography, like, what do you think about this film's relationship to the 1974 film?
It's so complicated, because for the most part it's really telling you we're doing something different, but like I said, it is evoking some of that sweaty 70s-ness. It's evoking some of that like unpredictable danger. It's evoking some of the sleaziness and just the world gone mad of it all. But it's very strange to me that it is set in the 70s, because that puts it in a direct conversation with the original movie that I don't think it otherwise tries to invite. I guess maybe they were doing so because of that, like, always extremely tenuous, like, this is question, a true story or whatever. But that feels like a mistake to me, especially in terms of the ways that they just completely failed to make 1973 come to life. Mm-hmm. But to paraphrase what I said in my Letterboxd review, like, as a lover of the original movie, watching this, I have to put in work to like the things that are different, because by virtue of feeling different, your gut instinct is that, well, this is bad. But none of it is. None of it, very little of it is actively great. And we've touched on, like the Arlie Ermey or the Daniel Pearl of that. But for the most part, this movie barely reminds me of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Honestly, that is the case. Like, it is easier for me to watch this as one of the very few actually good slashers from the first half of the 2000s. And I will point out, more people die via chainsaw in this film than in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I can't even say, well, a guy's killing people with a chainsaw, because that's sort of not something that happens in the original film. It's trying sort of to end at the same place. This, like, everything's awful, there's no hope. Like, this just kind of weird, brutal evil is just out there in the world. But it's taking a different path to get there, and I like that about it. And I like how quickly it lets you know that it has a different attitude. We touched on, but didn't really dig into, that John Larroquette narration at the beginning, where in the original film, it's just kind of very blunt scene setting. Like, he gets us to where we go. In the new film, it's part of this, like, framing narrative.
Oh, yeah, that's really peculiar.
This film actually does have, and I don't think it works.
No.
But it's a choice, and it's trying to do this weird, like, using the found footage of the cops investigating the Hewitt farm as this kind of, like, grainy, like badly processed stock black and white, like, cops filming the crime scene. And, like, Larroquette's narration is going into substantially more, like, detail, not in terms of, like, plot material, but, like, situating us as people who are engaging with this as, like, a news story.
Yeah. No, that's true. That is really peculiar. I do forget about that by the time the movie has started, and then it ends with it, and you're like, oh yeah, we're doing this. Okay. Yeah, I mean, just the thing that struck me about that was like, well, Blair Witch was a huge hit 4 years ago.
Blair Witch, well, that's the thing. Like, it's not like a new original thing it's doing, and it's not, again, doing it well, but it's weird because it changes the tone of it. Like, Texas Chainsaw 1 feels like a fable in a way. Uh-huh. This doesn't feel like it's real, but it begins and ends with these sort of very insistent, like, attempts to make it feel like it takes place in the real world. And I don't know if you noticed, this has placed its... So it has the boilerplate, this movie was based on real events, but blah, blah, blah was changed, which I'm fairly sure is just its way of saying Ed Gein existed.
Oh, yeah.
But it places that at a really conspicuous place in the end credits crawl, where, like, unless you bolted out of the theater the minute the credits started, you probably were still in your seat to see that happen in the crawl. So it's like, it's anxious for us to think that this is, like, rooted in reality, which is ironic because it's less so than the original film.
Yeah, it's so absurd for the most part. Huh. Yeah, no, that is interesting. I think that's a mistake. But whatever. Yeah. How about you? Did you feel like you've adequately covered its relationship to the original?
I mean, I think a lot of what you said I would co-sign. Like, it can't help but feel like it's doing different things just to do different things because it wants to have its own personality. But when the thing, and this is the exact way you framed it in your Letterboxd review, when the thing you're changing is perfect, every change is going to make it less perfect. But I do appreciate that it's not just running us through the same thing. Because we already had that, right? I mean, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is basically a perfect or an exact remake of the original movie anyway.
We'll put that on the DVD box cover. Perfect, says Tim Brayton.
But no, so like, I'm glad that it's trying to not do that. And that actually, I think, kind of ends up being what's interesting about these Platinum Dune films, but I think it is what's interesting about Marcus Nispel's two films. Is
yes.
Like, they're trying to be like, well, what's the thing you liked in the original? So you liked this thing. Like, you liked this sort of sweaty awfulness. Or you liked the kind of elaborate Baroque kills in Friday the 13th. So I'll give those to you, but I'm going to take a very different path to give them to you so you don't just feel like I'm giving you the same thing. And I think it's why those are maybe the specific two best of these horror remakes of the 2000s.
Yeah, Nispel has, well, and whoever is writing for him, but they have a vision for something, and that it is nice that somebody has an idea of what they want this movie to be, because that,
right.
It's not really what you get in the Amityville Horror with Ryan Reynolds.
No, I mean, Amityville Horror, we didn't even really, I think, discuss putting that on our candidates list because it's just such a dismal washout of a movie.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. I think we briefly discussed it, and I considered it on the grounds of Ryan Reynolds just running around shirtless, but it was not enough.
I mean, I think we discussed every single Platinum Dunes film because there aren't that many.
Yeah.
I briefly did push for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so we were definitely like considering all options, but
yeah, no, thank you to that. But yeah, real quick, we haven't really talked about the kills or the gore or whatever kind of at all. I think there are definitely some moments that lean in on the sleaze factor of the movie. Like, I think the moment that sticks out the most is I think it's Mike Vogel. He's being dragged down the staircase into the basement, and his fingernails get like chipped off as he's like kind of clawing at the walls, and that is a gross close up.
That is a gross close up. There's a scene where Beale cuts off Leatherface's arm with a cleaver that I think gets some pretty nice attention. I do think one of the things this film is kind of trying to do that the original did, though, it's not lingering on its gore. It's more lingering on its mood.
That is true.
And I think...
And the two chainsaw deaths you mentioned in particular of Pepper and Morgan, there's no blood in either of those.
Right.
It is all implication.
Right. Oh, yeah. And, like, how much of that is a choice and how much of that is... we don't want to get slapped with a rating. We don't want to have to, like, negotiate down from an NC-17. I don't know. I think if this film's release date was a year or more post-Saw, I don't think this is how this film would have functioned. I think we kind of got lucky in that the door to torture porn had not been opened. Because you can tell that this film is sort of thinking about, like, well, what if we just kind of focus on torture scenes? And it never really does.
Yeah. I mean, the closest it gets is that Mike Vogel crucifixion scene where he gets salt rubbed in his wound. He's, like, being prepped as meat, and it's pretty brutal. But, like, that...
Exactly.
In post-Saw world, that would have happened to Mike Vogel. That would have happened to Jonathan Tucker. Like, it just would have been happening more frequently.
Right, because like I don't want to credit the people who made this with being like sophisticated and subtle filmmakers. I think if they'd had the Saw model to rip off, they would have.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
but like I do appreciate that it is not just like a parade of gore.
Yeah, and
that's not what the Texas Chainsaw's ever been.
No, it really hasn't, and it's definitely for its best that it keeps some of the better elements of the original, which is nice. But they're more vague and tonal and aesthetic, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's gonna do it for me on Texas Chainsaw 03. How about you?
I mean, I think that's good. Like, I'm glad I had a chance to revisit this film. I have not watched it since I did this whole series in 2008. It holds up. Still my second favorite Texas Chainsaw movie.
Behind which one?
Probably Texas Chainsaw: The Next Generation.
Oh, okay. Mine's Texas Chainsaw 3D, I think. With Alexandra Daddario. But yeah, no, do I disagree with that? I mean, I do like Texas Chainsaw 2 a lot more than you do. I think I would put that
almost every serious horror fan likes it more than I do.
Yeah, and I understand your reasons for not, but I just don't possess those compunctions. So I would put that above this one, but I'd say it's a comfortable number 3. Yeah.
We can agree it's certainly the best one that Tobe Hooper had nothing to do with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that good for Marcus Nispel. We did not put the Friday the 13th one on the list because it felt too similar to this. But it's not like we're not gonna stray too far from the tree on our second episode of this month. We are gonna be coming back at you with the 2007 remake of The Hitcher, which I've never seen. I'm very curious what on earth that's going to be shaped like.
I will say nothing about it. I will let you go into it blind and innocent.
Great. I appreciate that. I don't even know who's in it. I'm very excited to just kind of dive into it.
I love it.
This is a movie that has completely missed me in terms of just having any sort of frame of reference for what it could possibly be. I'm sure it's not good. But why
I will say the remarkable alchemy of Texas Chainsaw 2003 somehow being good did not get repeated.
Yeah, that's the thing. But yeah, we'll catch you in 2 weeks for that. But in the meantime, have a good end of summer, everyone. We're closing out the summer with a very summery franchise. So I think that was the right move for us.
Agreed.
But yeah, thank you, everybody. Bye bye.
She ate me.